Welcome folks to the first of our Leadership Insight series webinars, which this time we have an interview with Michael Josem, who is the Senior Manager of the Game Security Team at Pokerstars.com, and this webinar is being brought to you by Organisations That Matter in conjunction with the OTM Academy. I'm your host, Gary Ryan, and I'm the founder of Organisations That Matter and the OTM Academy, so welcome aboard. I'm really looking forward to this particular interview with Michael, who's about to be based at the Isle of Man. He's just waiting on a visa to come through for him to be able to enter the United Kingdom. And the purpose of this interview is to discover some of the insights from Michael's personal journey, which you will find is absolutely fascinating, that have made a significant impact upon his ability to successfully navigate the first 5 or 6 years or so of his career. Now, I first met Michael when he was an elected student representative for the Student Union at Monsu, Monash University Student Union at Caulfield at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, in the early to mid-2000s, and we'll hear more about this a little bit later on. Michael has had a fascinating career in just a few short years, and today we're going to learn about how he has come to work as the Senior Manager of Game Security for Pokerstars.com. Now, I'll hear a little bit more about Michael in just a few moments, and we'll hear from Michael just to explain a bit about Pokerstars.com and his current role, and then we'll talk about his journey to get there. But before we do that, we just need to encourage you to take some notes as you're listening. If you've got some questions, I'll give you some opportunities to ask some questions. If you do wish to ask some questions, you'll see that you'll have a little control panel in the top right-hand corner of your screen. So you can either raise your hand by clicking on the hand button, and then I will give you an opportunity to ask your question, and once again I'll show you what symbol you can look for to know when to raise your hand to ask some questions, and or to type in a question yourself as we go, and I'll ask that question of Michael. This webinar is being recorded, and the webinar recording will be made available to those of you who have tuned in today, and therefore if you think you've missed anything, the great thing with webinar recordings is that you can go back and listen to it and watch it again later at your leisure. When you see this symbol, the little person leaning up against the question mark, that's when the opportunity will be for you to raise your hands to ask a question of Michael. So again, I please encourage you to do so. A little bit about Organisations That Matter. Organisations That Matter fundamentally exist to help develop senior leaders and developing leaders to be able to do the things that matter, to enable them to create an organisation that matters to the people that work in the organisation, the people that the organisation serves, and the broader community. And our view of the world is that if you do those three things, then you'll achieve the goals and objectives that you're working towards, including, of course, all the financial ones. It's not rocket science, but we believe, unfortunately, that a lot of organisations don't behave in such a way, and we exist to help leaders in particular develop the skills to be able to ensure that their organisation matters. Here's a range of the organisations that Matter has worked with over time, so you can see that there's a broad spread of organisations, from government through to corporate through to educational. Now here we are with Michael. So let's get into the interview and really start hearing from Michael himself, because that's why we're here. Michael, I'm very interested in just hearing a little bit about Pokerstars.com and what your current role is, if you wouldn't mind sharing that with our audience, please.
Sure. Well, Pokerstars is essentially serves as a playing field for players to play online poker, and in doing so, we're a little bit, I guess, like a sporting field, in that Pokerstars is not a participant in the game. Don't benefit from players winning or losing or whatever. They just, I guess, provide a venue. And so much like eBay puts buyers and sellers in touch with each other in an auction environment, then Pokerstars puts players in touch with each other in an online poker environment. And so I think that's a really important distinction, in that I think a lot of people misunderstand our business slightly, in that people have this perception of online gaming as being some sort of offshore unregulated environment, whereas Pokerstars very much operates legally within the regulations that apply to us, and in doing so, I think that's an important distinction to make. My role and part of that in the game security team is about essentially ensuring that the game's played by the rules, and so what that means is that for example, in the game of poker, it's very much it should be a game about each person for themselves. And so, for example, a way that some people try and break the rules is through what we call collusion, and that is two or more players working together. And it's one of my team's roles is to ensure that that doesn't happen. So I guess we're sort of like the umpires on a football field.
And so, I would imagine quite a number of the people in our audience, certainly myself, when we recently caught up and we were talking about what you were currently doing, would be fascinated that such a job even exists. And I'm interested to know on what would be the top 3 decisions, actions, or turning points that you believe have resulted in you ending up with, as it turns out for you, fairly much a dream job.
Sure. Well, look, I first became involved in this industry, for lack of a better word, as a customer. Playing poker was something that was of interest to me. I originally became involved in the game because a friend of mine had a little bit of a poker night at his place, and I thought I'll come along, and I became interested because one of the things I've always felt that I was bad at doing was in terms of reading body language, of reading between the lines. And if you saw the James Bond movie Casino Royale, a key part of that movie is the plot twist of interpreting some facial tick or some what they call a tell in reading body language. And so I first became interested in poker because I thought that was what poker was all about. Subsequently, I discovered that rather than being a game of perception, it was actually a game of mathematics. And I happen to be reasonably competent at maths. I did all right at maths at school, and I understood all those sort of concepts of statistics and probability and so on. And therefore, I became an acceptable poker player. I guess the key turning point then was that some friends of mine had thought they'd been cheated by another online poker site, a competitor of Pokerstars, and so I did some relatively simple maths just using Microsoft Excel and made a little graph that basically proved some misbehaviour by the operators of the site. And then about 3 or 6 months later, Pokerstars contacted me and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about working in the online poker world?" I said, "No, I hadn't," and 3 months later, I was. So I guess that was a key turning point. Beyond that, or since working for Pokerstars, I think there's been 3 key practices or actions that really have been important to me. And first of all, I'm a big fan of a believer in excellent customer service. And I believe there are so many relationships in our society that really benefit from being looked at in terms of customer service. So, for example, I'm a big fan of believer that the staff member and manager relationship should really be viewed through the prism of customer service. And by that I mean that when a customer comes to you, an external customer in the normal sense of the word, they have certain expectations. And fundamentally those expectations are pretty analogous to the expectations that your staff do if you're a manager, or that your manager does if you're managed by someone else. And so I think that concept of customer service is so crucial. And I think the second important thing that I've found incredibly useful in my career now in this industry is to hire high quality people and to train and develop them. And that if you're irreplaceable, then you can't ever be promoted. And so in that sense, I think one of the things that's really important in any organisation is to ensure that people are developing and growing, so that the organisation grows and develops with them.
And the third thing, Michael, you mentioned.
And the third thing is, the third thing is a much I guess simpler concept, and that is the idea of getting things done. In that, especially in my personal life and outside work, I can be often very good at procrastinating, which is probably not a good skill at all. But there are so many opportunities in work, and where you essentially have a choice where you can delay or not do something, or you can just get it done. I'm a big believer. The first thing I do every morning when I log into my work email, as many of us do, first of all, go through the emails and close or delete or whatever your email tool does, all the emails that you don't need action on, that you don't need to worry about. And then I just simply go through and reply to all the quick ones. And then, after I've spent the 10 or 20 minutes doing that, then, I've got a bit of a work agenda that, essentially is driven by my email inbox. And so, I remember last year I had a particular project that I was working on to develop some specifications to describe to our programmers a new feature to develop. And I kept on procrastinating. It would have been 4 or 5 weeks. And then I actually did it. And the actual work was only 2 hours. And so the amount of time that I spent procrastinating was much greater than the amount of work of actually just getting it done. And so there's some really good stuff on the internet. If you search for the term "getting things done," of just getting things done and checking off those items on your to-do list one at a time.
That's fascinating. So the three key points that Michael's just made for everyone that's listening is excellent customer service, and Michael's given the example of a manager-employee relationship and seeing employees as customers. And we'll hear more about Michael's new role where you have a team of 11 that you'll be leading. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll hear a bit more about that later on. Hire quality people, train and develop them. And the third thing was getting things done. And Michael gave a couple of examples for himself with the way he manages his email and work agenda, and the example at the end about procrastinating and how something in the end only took 2 hours to do, but it was 3 to 4 weeks. I'm sure many of our audience would find that very familiar. But what I found interesting about those 3 things goes back to your story with how you ended up at Pokerstars.com, because if I heard you correctly, the first thing you said was that you wanted to learn about poker because you wanted to learn how to read body language, and that was actually about you being self-aware enough about an area that you felt you needed to improve. So I see that as like your training and developer perspective before. So I see there's an alignment there. You also said that your friends identified that they believed that they'd seen some cheating or a fraud going on, and that you thought, well, using my math skills, I might be able to do something about that. So I see that in alignment with your excellent customer service. So you saw your friends as customers. But then most importantly, you did the third thing, which was you actually went and you put some graphs together and you did some research. You got things done, if you like, by putting these things together and actually discovering the mathematical probability of some of these poker results were such that the only way that they could have occurred was through someone actually manipulating the system. So it's interesting. I hear that the story of how you got to be where you are is absolutely aligned, and I don't know if you realise this, Michael, with the 3 key practices that you've just described to me. Can you see the connection there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think particularly on this idea of getting things done, and that I guess in terms of my political or my personal view on life, I've always sort of been a believer that if you have a market of any product, whether it be online poker, plastic bags, whatever, that if the market is well informed, they'll fundamentally make good decisions. And so when it came to this situation where I thought there was cheating, and on the online world, in certain sites, in limited situations, the regulation, to be frank, is relatively weak. And so as a result, I thought, oh look, the best way to effectively regulate this would be through the free flow of information for customers to become aware of that. And so I created a website as a result of that. It took me cost me $8 to register a domain name on the internet, and fiddled around for a couple of hours, and the next thing I know, it's having 50,000 people viewing it a day, and ends up on 60 Minutes in the US, and it becomes a worldwide news story. And not because I did anything fundamentally special, but because I spent a couple of hours, spent $8 to register a domain name, and with all the other free tools, simply got things done.
And so again, that just shows some initiative. I'm interested, Michael, in your development. How did it come to pass that over your developmental years, and maybe particularly when you first got to university in the year 2000, how do you think you formed such clarity about these 3 practices that have helped you in your career, and in fact created opportunities that quite probably, if you didn't have these 3 practices, just would not have come across your path, so that you've ended up in a job that you love?
Yeah, well, I guess that really relates back to the story of how I met you, Gary, in that, when I was at university, I got myself in, I had a friend of a friend who was involved in a student organisation at the university by the name of Tim Wilson, who subsequently became president and helped to play a key role in founding an organisation called Monix, which was all about developing students. And so for me, I was able, at a young age of, being 21, 22, 23, thereabouts, of being exposed to these ideas and And that, one of the, I think the great advantages that I had is because I was exposed to the ideas, and I remember a few sessions that you, Gary, took, trained me and having conversation with you, where you spoke about many of these ideas. What's now, 8 or 9 years ago, and that's really, I guess, in a sense, a lot like compound interest. In that, in financial terms, if you start off with, a little bit of money and you grow by 2 or 3 or 4% a year, come your retirement, you're going to have quite a nest egg. And so one of the things that I was very fortunate is that, the early development in those areas, I believe, has given me an opportunity for that compound interest to accrue upon itself. Because when you have a resource or an asset in terms of your personal development, you have a real opportunity for growth, and you have a real opportunity to develop. And those skills that you develop as at whatever stage in life, they compound upon each other with the benefit of experience. And so I really think that developing people is a lot like developing any other asset in an organisation or within yourself as an individual.
And I think the important aspect here is, though, that you were exposed to some learning opportunities, but you just didn't leave it in the workshop or in a meeting room or in a one-on-one conversation at a cafe. I think, and it relates back to your getting things done, is that as you were in your formative years, you were practicing, you were putting into practice what you were learning, and like most people, making some little mistakes, I'm sure, along the way, but learning from each one of them, so much so that when you were able to get into starting your career, and we'll talk about in a moment your first job, which people may be surprised to hear about, by the way. And I think that's one of the critical aspects, though, is that you were actually doing things with what you were learning through your learning and development. You weren't just sitting back and going, oh, that sounds interesting. You actually got up. Now, you had to give up your time at university to take on the roles, and I might just get you to briefly talk about where your role, in fact, ended up at university, which gave you the opportunity to put these skills into practice.
Sure. Look, I started out there with this friend of mine, Tim Wilson, who essentially back at the end of 2000 said, "Hey, Michael, we need someone to fill this position. Can you fill out this form and take part?" I said, "Sure, no worries." And I didn't really have a clear idea of where it was going or what the purpose was, but a friend asked me to help out, and I was happy to do so. And as it turns out, I happened to enjoy this organisation, the student organisation, and subsequently elected to various other roles as education officer, and I think I was the clubs officer, and then as the president of the student organisation for 2 years running. And I think that idea, that what you just said there about putting things into action, again, it's your personal value or personal, I guess, I'm not sure quite exactly what the right word is, but personal value is probably a reasonable approximation, is, again, you can make that financial analogy, and that if you inherit a chunk of money and you just let that money sit there, then it's not going to grow or develop. And so much of our educational system is about, giving you that start, that seed base of skills, of resources. But the only way to grow those resources is by getting out there and having a crack. And so for me, it was through the student organisation at first, and then I got involved in politics and all sorts of other bits and pieces. But I'm a firm believer that if you go out and apply some of those skills, then you'll get better at them. And whereas if you just there from 9 to 5 and forget what you learned at work or in your meetings with other people or development opportunities, you're not going to get as much benefit out of it compared to if you're actually putting it to good use.
I normally describe this as taking personal responsibility for your learning and not handing over your responsibility to another person or persons, or even in fact an institution, which unfortunately I think a lot of people do. They hand responsibility for their learning over to an institution, thinking that the institution is going to somehow inject the learning into them. But as you've clearly described, you've got to take personal responsibility, take advantage of the seeds that the institution and people around you are providing, but go out and take action and have a crack, as you just said, and put it into action and learn. Now, we haven't actually captured, what were you studying? What were the degrees that you were studying, Michael?
Look, studying is probably a nasty word to describe what I was doing at university, but I was enrolled in a Bachelor of Arts and Information Management Systems, and at the end of it I finished with just a Bachelor of Arts with a major in Policy Studies. And while that gave me, I guess, a theoretical background or an ability to write and communicate at an acceptable level, I think so much of my development and growth and opportunity and learning at that time while I was enrolled at university happened outside the classroom. And that, that the skills that I apply in my life now, I've learnt through development programs when I did various exercises with Monix and Monash student employment and career service, and through the student organisation. The classroom, I did a subject on Australian political economy, or I did a subject on crime and travel writing and all sorts of other little bits and pieces that I'd have difficulty remembering the name of the subject, let alone anything I learnt in it. Whereas the skills and the experiences that I learnt in the student organisation were so incredibly crucial to my experience at university, and also to my subsequent opportunities and where I am today.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating? You did a subject on crime and you uncovered a global fraud.
Yeah,
you may never have seen the connection there. Sorry?
Yeah, look, it was a subject about crime, but I don't even remember any of the content that was in it. I had no idea what we spoke about, and it was crime and politics, myths and realities, or something like that. But, this is 6 or 7 years ago now. But
I think what you're highlighting.
So much of what happened. Yeah.
I think what you're highlighting, though, Michael, is that at the end of the day, when you go to university, it is important to get the degree. And as you described, at one stage you were doing a double degree, and you ended up coming at one degree. And I often describe that as a bus ticket. For many opportunities that have come, you need to show that you've got enough persistence, or whatever the right phrase is, to get through the degree, to get that ticket. But that ticket gets you on a bus that can take you all sorts of fascinating places. But alongside that, you've described the extreme value of being in a world of opportunity that you put yourself into at university to learn and develop and to put things into practice. And I think a lot of people underestimate the value of that from the point of view of the world is changing so fast, and particularly from a technological point of view and how that's affecting everything. The ability to learn on your feet, the ability to have had real concrete experiences of learning is absolutely critical for the way that the world is changing at such high speed today. And I think your story is a classic example of that. Do you mind just telling us briefly about your first role outside of university and where you thought you were going prior to the Pokerstars.com opportunity coming up?
Sure. Just before I do go on to that, I just want to pick up that one of the points that you just raised there about this idea of what's happening outside the classroom, and that one of the things that's happened in the last 20 and 30 years has been the massive explosion of tertiary education, both in Australia but also overseas. And for many graduates, having a degree is, I guess, essentially, and I don't like the other connotations of this word, but it's essentially it's a hygienic issue, in the sense that if you go to a restaurant, having clean hygiene is sort of like that bus ticket. It's sort of like the minimum acceptable standard.
Yes.
And so what I mean by that is that if you have a degree or you don't have a degree, it's a binary issue. And so in that sense, having completed a degree may well get you in the door, or it may be an introduction, but it's certainly not a finishing. And so when you as a potential employee are competing with other graduates, sure, well, you may have the hygienic completion of a degree, but you haven't gone. But there's so much more beyond that. And so, for example, to take it back to this analogy with the restaurant, if you clean hygiene, okay, it's passable, but it doesn't mean it's good or it's excellent, or the food can still be bad. And so those two things I think are quite separate, and that you need to, for a lot of people, especially in professional courses whether it be accounting or law or other various professions which require certain qualifications, having that degree is essentially like a hygiene issue. You need to get it, but there's so much more opportunities for growth beyond that first step.
It's interesting. Your clarity on that topic is such that it's not hard for me to see that second practice that you mentioned earlier about hiring high quality people, and I can see that in your case, yes, you'll be looking for that hygiene issue of have they got the degree. clearly you're going to be looking for high quality people in terms of their values and their views of the world and their personal practices. And then you've said the next thing we do after that is train and develop them so that they can continue to grow and learn the specific skills of the role. So as a manager now, I can see how you'd be putting that into practice. So again, just briefly, what was the first role that you did after university, and where did you think you were going prior to the Pokerstars.com opportunity?
Yeah, look, after finishing university, I started working as the job title was an electorate officer for a Member of Parliament, Bob Baldwin, who's a Member of Parliament on the New South Wales Lower North Coast. And that role was really a political role. It was you know, a lot of what that role was about around election time, producing all the junk mail that arrives in people's letterboxes. It was replying to letters from various constituents, and it was about, I guess, you know, very much about politics. And I thought, you know, having been in a student organisation, you know, I thought that, you know, politics might have been a future for me. But then after a year, I worked for another Member of Parliament as a media officer, you know, and in doing so, it was my job there was to communicate with local news outlets, whether it be TV, radio, newspapers, and so on, in northeastern Victoria. And again, I thought that, you know, politics was the path for me. And then, you know, I guess I had this wonderful opportunity put to me by Pokerstars, and, you know, grabbed it and haven't looked back. And, you know, now a few years later, I'm going to move to the other side of the world and experience a few new opportunities.
Which is interesting because you've just mentioned that you're about to move to the other side of the world, which is the Isle of Man, in fact. And when we recently caught up, you shared with me that having the opportunity to work in Europe was something that you'd hoped to have at some stage in your career, and it's probably ended up happening a little bit quicker than you might have otherwise thought. But there's a little bit of a pattern here for you because you were prepared to move. In fact, I've just had a question from one of the audience participants saying, oh, Michael, you were prepared to move to New South Wales for that electoral role. Has that related in any way to your preparedness to move to the Isle of Man now?
Yeah, look, I've had wonderful opportunities, you know, to move and live in different parts of Australia. I grew up in Melbourne. I lived in Newcastle for a year. I lived in Wangaratta in northeast Victoria for a year, and lived in Sydney now for a few years. And you know, one of the things that is notable about, especially people who live in urban Australia, is a remarkable reluctance to move. And so for example, I think the Australian Bureau of Statistics recently released some information that showed that, you know, a very high percentage of Australians, especially those in urban Australia, in Melbourne, Sydney, and the other capital cities, simply don't move for work. Whereas, you know, in a place like America, for example, it's almost ordinary for someone who finishes their schooling locally where they grew up, then they go live somewhere for, you know, while they do tertiary education, and then move to a third or a fourth place to work. And so, whereas here in Australia, people in capital cities simply don't seem to move because you know, there's no need to. One thing to note out of that, though, is that in rural Australia there is huge movement, and that is that essentially as soon as people in rural Australia turn 18, you know, the census and the migration statistics show that very, very high proportions of them move to capital cities or move to elsewhere in Australia, either for work or for study or for a big adventure, and you know, going to see the big smoke is almost like a rite of passage. And then these people, you know, might go live in, you know, a capital city in their 20s and early 30s, and then what seems to happen is they seem to you know, couple up and find a partner, and then move back to the country to you know, raise kids and give them the same opportunity. And so in that sense, for me, growing up in Melbourne, you know, many of my friends still are in Melbourne that I went to school with. But you know, I think that moving is so, you know, it's such a wonderful experience. I wouldn't have had a tenth of the experiences I'd have if I hadn't moved.
And that's actually a similarity for international students, which maybe a lot of international students don't recognise, that they actually are doing something that a lot of, as you said, urban-based people don't do, and that's expose themselves to an experience of moving often, in fact, many thousands of kilometres away, often to a completely different culture. And they are actually much more global citizens than what they might realise as a result of that preparedness to actually go and do what they're doing, even though their focus is on studying. It's a sort of a story or a level of awareness that possibly a lot of international students could benefit from if they were aware that they were actually developing that school. I'd like to just quickly show folk, if they're not sure, that Michael has in fact been involved in sort of uncovering a fraud, I should say, in the United States, and he was on the 60 Minutes show. So on the screen right now you can see a little screen take from the 60 Minutes interview that Michael was on in November 2008. So if people want to go and have a look at that, that's easy to find. You can actually visit Michael's own website at michaeljosem.com. That's Michael, Josem.com, and you'll be able to find some more information about that there too. So just in case folk hadn't seen that, there's an opportunity there to go and have a look. All right, just one last question, Michael. Our time has already been flying by. I'm just interested if there was any times throughout your journey where you've doubted yourself and your ability to succeed, and if so, was there a clear example, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, look, I think I've always been a naturally shy person. In that, one of the things that I could quite happily do would be to live quite isolated existence, as it were, and to, at school I was interested in reading and interested in computer bits and pieces and all that sort of stuff. And so I think that one of the things that I've really overcome is this concept of getting to understand other people and to overcome that I guess, innate shyness. In that, I guess that sort of relates to one of the reasons why I first became interested in poker. In that, I thought that it was a game of perception. I thought that it was all about reading body language. And I guess, growing up, I'd never been particularly aware of other people's feelings, never been particularly sensitive. As a couple of people close to me say, I can be very unemotional about certain things, and so in that sense, I think that one of the things that I hope I've gone some way to overcome is fundamental shyness, and that I guess human beings are a lot more than just computers. That they're not just rational actors that do whatever the economics of a decision or the game theory might suggest is the optimal play, but rather make decisions based upon feelings and other factors. And so in that sense, hopefully I've gone some way to overcome some of those limitations or doubts.
Well, I would have thought initially becoming a student president, then getting yourself involved in politics as an electoral officer, and then getting yourself to star in a 60 Minutes episode with millions and millions of people watching, I think you might have well and truly overcome that. But the key message I actually hear there, Michael, is it's not about rightness or wrongness with our personalities. It's really just about awareness and becoming aware. And I think the thing that's always struck me with you is your level of self-awareness. Your personality is not right or wrong in terms of whatever it is, whether you're shy or extremely extroverted, or whether you're highly emotional or much more task-based, because neither of them are right or wrong. The issue is just being aware of them and understanding the impact that it has on other people, and then learning how to work with your strengths, but also learning how to manage some of the areas that you do find more of a challenge, such as shyness. And I think your example of, again, putting yourself out there, getting things done, having some real clear principles to which you're constantly working to, which are, in your case, excellent customer service, hiring quality people and getting things done, having those clear principles, it's amazing how when you put them into practices, as you have done on a personal level, it's amazing how they have such a positive impact on your career and lead you to places that you just never would have imagined even existed. And I'm sure Senior Manager Game Security Team was a title that at the beginning of 2008 you didn't even know existed.
Yeah, it's spot on. I mean, that 10 years ago, this whole industry was occupied by 3 or 4 companies that were pretty small and had between them a combined total of maybe 5,000 or 6,000 customers worldwide, and now this single company that I work for has something on the order of 45 million accounts over the years, and so having dealt something like 55 billion hands of poker, and so that growth over the last few years has been exponential. But I think fundamentally it comes out to that same concept of providing good customer service. And so one of the things that the organisation that I work for has really attracted me is being focusing on that high quality of customer service by being people focused, by being authentic, and continually challenging itself to improve.
And again, I think, we've constantly heard about your awareness about customer service, your awareness about development and the importance of it for people, and the awareness of it actually getting things done all came from your involvement as a student representative back in the early 2000s. And I think, again, it just highlights the unbelievable value of people getting in at university and getting themselves involved in clubs and societies or student representation, whatever it might be, and really being aware of the employability skills that they're developing. Time has absolutely flown by. I just want to give an opportunity for anyone in the audience to ask a question. If you'd like to raise your hand, and if you'd like to ask a question directly to Michael. We've had some different questions pop up, but we've been able to answer them along the way. Michael, some people have typed some questions in. I'll just give you a brief moment more to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question directly of Michael. Okay, it appears that we might not have any there at the moment. So I'll just, if for those of you that are in the 20 to 30-year-old age group, I've recently released my first book, What Really Matters for Young Professionals. So it's out now, and you can get that book from orgsthatmatter.com or the direct website address that you can see in front of you. And if you're really not sure about what employability is, or understanding your personal values, or how you actually align yourself with an organisation and its values, as Michael has done, understanding how you practice service excellence, which Michael's been talking about, and the role that mentors and other people play in your life, and how you can stop yourself from jumping from conclusions. There's a whole range of 15 practices that you can learn about in the book, and there's an online course that you can also access as well, which gets delivered by email, and each of the 16 lessons take between 10 to 30 minutes to complete. It's a fabulous resource to help people in their personal development. Throughout 2011, through Organisations That Matter and the OTM Academy, we'll be sharing with you a whole range of webinars. We've got the upcoming Creating an OTM Plan for Personal Success series of webinars, which people have just been absolutely delighted in the face-to-face workshops, so we're taking that online to you. Learning how to ask questions that matter and discovering how to create teams that matter are a couple of programs that we've had extremely popular over time. An introduction to the 7 elements of the OTM service strategy, and we've heard Michael talk a lot about the importance of service excellence in the development of his own skills and attributes that have enabled him to get to the current spot in his career, and uncovering the fundamentals of effective dialogue, which is fundamentally about communication. And there will be many more webinars throughout the year that we'll be bringing to you. If you haven't joined the OTM Academy, www.otmacademy.com is where you can find us. There's heaps of resources, blogs, videos, access to these webinars, etc., access to mentoring that you can get by being a member of the OTM Academy, which as of today has 360 members from 15 countries around the world. If you'd like to contact me, you have the contact details there in front of you. You can connect with me via Twitter, LinkedIn, Blogger, and of course by the Orgs That Matter, Organisations That Matter page on Facebook. So if you want to connect with any of those places, please feel free to do so, and or through the GaryRyans.com blog. Now, Michael, have you got anything that you would like to say as a final point that you might not have had a chance to share with us at this point in time?
Look, I think you've pretty much covered everything. I guess I just want to thank you, Gary, for having given me the opportunity to chat with you, and hopefully I've done something towards answer some of the questions of some of your the audience. And so hopefully it hopefully makes someone, gives someone an opportunity and to think about something that they're now able to perhaps apply and to get something done in their own life.
And I know that your view of the world is really about helping other people, and I really appreciate your time today, Michael, and sharing your story. And I know you're very humble, and you might not think that your own story is all that fascinating, but I was absolutely delighted. And folks, I was actually meeting with Michael earlier in the year when I hadn't been fully aware of some of the things that he was doing. And while I was meeting with him, a young chap with his girlfriend came up and asked Michael if he was in fact Michael Josem, to which Michael replied, "Yes, I am." And then he thanked him for the money that he had returned to him as a result of Michael's work. So right then and then in front of me, literally minutes after Michael had told me that story, and this person wasn't planted, was he, Michael?
No, it was sort of embarrassing. Here we are at Chatham Shopping Centre in suburban Melbourne, and this guy comes up and it's sort of awkward. But I guess hopefully, I did something to make his life better off than it was beforehand. So,
and folks, $20 million was returned to players as a result of the work that Michael did. And again, his real reason for doing it in the first place was to help some friends out. He discovered through using his mathematical skills that, yes, there did appear to be an issue. And then he had the courage through purchasing an $8 domain name and putting some information on a website to get it out there. And as he said, he had millions of hits on that, which then led to him being on the US 60 Minutes program, and then led to a dream job offer for him, which is now taking him overseas to the Isle of Man to work. It's just a wonderful and fascinating story about, again, putting some simple principles into practice, which again were excellent customer service, hiring quality people and developing them and getting things done. Michael, thank you for your time. I've really thoroughly enjoyed our time together. I'm aware we've gone slightly over time, so I apologise for that, but it's just been fascinating and I decided to keep going. Audience, I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm sure you have. It has been fascinating listening to Michael, and I look forward to our next Leadership Insight series with you. Look out for the recording in your inboxes. Thanks for coming along. I look forward to working with you next time.